Dorothy hears the knock before she decides whether to answer it. 3 sharp raps, then silence, then one more softer, like whoever's on the other side already regrets it. She sets down the fabric samples she's been sorting for tomorrow's client meeting and crosses the small apartment in bare feet. Through the peephole, she sees him standing under the hallway light, rain still dripping off his coat, even though the building has an awning. Yona Kang, her husband, technically for another 6 weeks. She opens the door, only as far as the chain allows. You have no right to come here. He doesn't argue. He doesn't do the thing he used to do, where his voice drops low and even and she feels the ground shift under her. Tonight his shoulders are wrong, lower than she remembers. Like something in him has already given up before his mouth catches up. I know, he says. Then leave. He should. That's what makes this strange. Yona Kang has never once, in 6 years, done what he's supposed to do when a door is closed on him. He owns buildings. He owns the people who work in them. Doors open for him by default. Tonight he just stands there, rein on his collar, eyes on her, not the door. I'm dying, he says. She almost laughs. Almost. It would be exactly like him, theatrical, manipulative, a line designed to get past a chain lock. She's seen him talk grown men into signing away companies with less than that sentence. But something about the way he says it doesn't match the performance she's braced for. There's no weight behind it, no pressure aimed at her. He says it the way a person reports a fact they haven't fully accepted yet. She unhooks the chain, not because she believes him, because she needs to see his face when he explains. He hands her a folder before she can ask. Medical letterhead. Numbers she doesn't fully understand, except for the ones circled in red, and the word beneath them that she does understand. Poisoning, slow, ongoing. Someone in my own organization, he says. Months, they think, maybe longer. Dorothy sits down on the arm of her couch because her legs decide for her. She flips through pages that read like a countdown. Doctors don't know how long. Could be months. Could be weeks. The kind of sentence that isn't really a sentence, it's a door left open on purpose, so the person reading it can walk through it in their own head, over and over, filling in a date. She waits for him to ask for something. That's how this always goes. Yona doesn't hand someone bad news without following it with a request. He doesn't ask her to stop the divorce. He doesn't ask her to forgive 6 years of secrets she didn't know she was living inside. He says, give me one last night with my wife. And Dorothy, who spent 3 months building a life where his name doesn't come up, who finally opened a fashion studio with her name on the lease and nobody else's, looks at the man who once made her believe love could survive anything and tells him no. She's still holding the folder when the front window shatters. Glass across the floor, a shape moving fast past the fire escape. Dorothy doesn't have time to scream before Yona is already between her and the window, already moving like the 6 years never softened him at all. Down, he says, and it isn't a request either, but this time she listens. 2 men come through the door in under 10 seconds, professionals, not opportunists, the kind of men who know exactly which apartment they're in and exactly who they came for. Yona meets the first one before he clears the doorframe. Dorothy hears more than sees the next several seconds. Furniture breaking, a body hitting the wall hard enough to crack the drywall, a sound that might be Yona taking a hit he doesn't make noise about. By the time it's over, one man is unconscious on her kitchen floor and the other has run. Yona is breathing hard, one hand pressed to his side, blood starting to show dark through his shirt. They followed you, Dorothy says. It isn't a question. They didn't follow me, he says. They've been watching you for weeks. That's the sentence that changes everything. Not the folder, not the poison. The fact that whoever is coming for Yona Kang has already decided Dorothy is part of the target. She spends the rest of that night in a car with blacked-out windows, heading toward a mansion she swore she'd never walk into again, because the woman who left that house 3 months ago doesn't exist anymore for the people hunting her husband. To them, she's still his wife, still valuable, still a way to hurt him. If she wants to survive what's coming, she doesn't get to be someone who left. If your heart is already racing, hit like right now so more people see this one. And subscribe. Because what Dorothy walks into next is more dangerous than anything that just happened in that apartment. The Kang estate hasn't changed. Same iron gate, same staff who won't quite meet her eyes, same portrait of Yona's late father in the entry hall that always made Dorothy feel like she was being evaluated the moment she walked in. What has changed is how the family looks at her now. Yona's mother meets them in the hallway still wearing pearls at midnight, the way she always does, like grief and formality are the same muscle. She looks at Dorothy the way you'd look at a stain that reappeared after you thought it was cleaned. She left him, his mother says to Yona, not to Dorothy, as if Dorothy is a topic rather than a person in the room. Now she comes back because he's dying. She came back because your son's enemies broke into her home, Dorothy says. The room goes quiet in a specific way. The way a room goes quiet when someone says something true that nobody expected the outsider to say out loud. Yona's younger brother, Sungmin, is the one who breaks it, stepping forward with the kind of smile that looks warm until you notice it doesn't move his eyes. "Welcome back, sister-in-law," he says. "I'm sure you're only here for him." Something about the phrase sits wrong in Dorothy's chest, though she can't name why yet. She files it away instead of answering it. She's learned that much, at least, from 6 years married into this family. You don't hand people your suspicion before you have proof. She's given a room, not their old room. A guest room with a lock that only works from the outside, which nobody bothers to explain and Dorothy doesn't bother to ask about because she already understands. She isn't a wife here right now. She's a liability being contained. That's fine. Containment goes both ways. If they're watching her, she can watch them right back. If you've ever had to walk back into a room full of people who have already decided who you are, you already know the weight of it. Sit with that for a second. Because Dorothy is about to find out that room was the easy part. The commanders don't trust her either. 6 men who run different arms of the Kang operation. Shipping, finance, security, and things Dorothy has decided not to ask about. Sit around a table the next morning discussing her husband's condition like it's a line item. "She shouldn't be in this meeting," one of them says, not quietly enough. "She's the one who found the second attack team's entry point last night," Yona says, before Dorothy can answer for herself. She stays. That's not quite true yet, but by the end of the meeting, it is because Dorothy, listening more than speaking, notices something none of the 6 men flagged. The attack on her apartment wasn't random, and it wasn't rushed. Whoever planned it knew the building's blind camera angle. That information exists in exactly one place. The security briefing Yona's own team compiled 2 weeks ago. Someone inside gave it away. Dorothy doesn't say who. She doesn't know yet. But she watches Sungmin's face when she says it out loud, and for half a second before the concern reassembles itself, something flickers there that looks less like worry and more like calculation. She starts digging that afternoon, quietly, the way she used to comb through fabric suppliers looking for the one lying about their thread count. Old habits, repurposed. What she finds first isn't about the poisoning. It's about her own marriage. Buried in a decade-old ledger in her late father's handwriting is a name she doesn't expect. Kang. A debt. Not money, an old business arrangement that went bad. The kind of failure that in this family's world gets settled generationally, not immediately. A promise made before Dorothy ever set foot in Korea that someone in her family would eventually be tied to someone in his. She sits with that for a long time. It would be easy to feel like her entire marriage was arranged, engineered, a transaction disguised as a love story. And for a moment, that's exactly how it feels, like the floor she's been standing on for 6 years was never really there. But then she remembers the actual years. The way Yona used to sit across from her in restaurants and forget to eat because he was too busy listening to her talk about a dress pattern. The way he flew back from Singapore once, mid-negotiation, because she mentioned offhand that she hadn't been sleeping well. Nobody arranges that. A debt might have put them in the same room. It didn't write the 6 years that came after. When she brings it to him that night, expecting him to be as blindsided as she is. His face tells her something worse. He already knew. You knew, she says, and you let me believe I fell in love with you by accident. You did fall in love with me by accident, he says. I just didn't correct you when the accident became convenient. It's the most honest thing he's said to her in years, and it still isn't honest enough. Dorothy walks out of the room before she says something she can't take back, not because she's done with him, but because for the first time since this started, she isn't sure whether she's angrier at him or at herself for not seeing it sooner. Here's the part that changes the shape of everything you thought you understood about this story. If you're invested in Dorothy right now, drop a comment with who you think is really behind this, because in the next few minutes, the poisoning stops being a mystery and starts being a plan, and it's not the plan you think. The second doctor's report comes back 4 days later, and it doesn't match the first. Dorothy is the one who insists on it, a private physician, someone with no ties to the Kang family, brought in under a different name so nobody on staff can flag it. What he finds isn't just poison. It's a specific compound, dosed with precision, designed to mimic terminal organ failure without actually being fatal on the timeline the first report suggested. Someone wanted him diagnosed, the doctor tells her. Not dead, diagnosed. It takes Dorothy a moment to understand the difference, and when she does, it reorganizes every assumption she's made for the past 2 weeks. Nobody needs Yona dead to take his empire. They need him believed to be dying weak enough, distracted enough, sympathetic enough that, when he steps back for treatment, someone else can step forward and take the reins with the family's blessing. And there's a second layer underneath that one. Documents have started circulating, quietly, deniably, suggesting that if Yona's condition worsens or he dies, the timeline points to Dorothy. A woman who left him, then reappeared right as his health collapsed. A woman with motive, opportunity, and a very convenient absence during the exact weeks the poisoning would have started. Someone isn't just taking the empire. Someone is building a story where Dorothy takes the fall for it. Dorothy sits with that for longer than she means to. Not fear, exactly, something colder. The realization that somewhere in this house, someone has spent weeks writing a version of her future where she's the villain, and she's been walking past them at breakfast the whole time. She goes back through every conversation she's had since arriving, every room Sungmin was in, every time he offered to handle things, so Yona wouldn't have to. He's the one who suggested she not attend certain meetings for her own safety. He's the one who quietly informed the staff that her return should be kept low-key. He's the one, she now remembers, who was in the security office the week the camera blind spot was documented. Sungmin, who called her sister-in-law with a smile that never reached his eyes. She doesn't confront him, not yet. She's learned enough from this family to know that the person who shows their hand first loses. There's a version of this story where Dorothy spends the next few days hiding in that guest room, waiting for someone else to fix things. That's not what happens. This is where the story stops being about a wife caught in the middle and starts being about a woman who refuses to stay small. 2 days later, one of the commanders, a broad, unreadable man named Choi who runs the shipping side of the operation, corners her near the estate's back stairwell. You shouldn't be walking around alone, he says, not unkindly, just flat. Not with what's happening. Then walk with me, Dorothy says, and tell me why your name is on the manifest for the container that came through the port 2 nights before the attack on my apartment. Choi's expression doesn't change, but something behind his eyes does. He didn't expect her to have found that. Nobody expected her to have found that. She'd spent an entire evening cross-referencing shipping logs against security assignments, matching names to dates the way she used to match fabric dye lots to production runs, because a pattern is a pattern whether it's silk or sabotage. It turns out the container wasn't weapons. It was money, an untraceable transfer routed through Choi's division without his sign-off, using his credentials without his knowledge. Someone had used his own division to move funds meant to pay the men who broke into her apartment. Choi goes quiet for a long moment, then does something Dorothy doesn't expect. He apologizes, not for doubting her exactly, but for underestimating what she was capable of finding. "You should have been in these meetings from the start," he says. It's a small moment. It doesn't undo 3 months of being treated like an outsider in a house she used to call home. But it's the first crack in the wall the family built around her, and cracks, Dorothy has learned, are how you eventually get a whole wall down. Yona notices the shift before she tells him about it. He finds her that night in the estate's old library, papers spread across a table that used to hold nothing but his father's unread books, and he watches her for a moment before she realizes he's there. "You've turned my commanders into your research assistants," he says. "They turned themselves into that," she says, "the moment they realized I wasn't going to disappear just because it was convenient for them." He sits across from her, slower than he used to move, still healing, still favoring the side where the first bullet caught him. There's a version of this conversation that could go a dozen directions. An argument about the divorce, about the debt, about the 6 years of things unsaid. Instead, he just watches her work for a while, the way he used to watch her sketch dress patterns at 2 in the morning back, when neither of them had any reason to expect the other person would still be there for breakfast. "I used to think protecting you meant keeping you away from all of this," he says finally. "And now I think I was protecting the wrong thing," he says. "I was protecting the idea of you, not the actual person who just cornered one of my most dangerous men in a stairwell and made him apologize." It's not quite an apology from him, not yet, but it's close enough that Dorothy lets herself smile for the first time since she walked back through that iron gate. His mother is harder to win over, and it takes something none of them expect, a threat that has nothing to do with the poisoning at all. A rival family, sensing weakness in the Kang organization, while Yona's condition is still publicly unresolved, tries to move on one of their smaller operations downtown. It's not a large attack. It's a test, a way of checking whether the family is as vulnerable as the rumors suggest. Yona is still too weak to respond himself, and Sungmin, still playing the loyal brother in public, volunteers to handle it personally. Dorothy is the one who insists on going with him, not because she trusts him, but because she doesn't, and because leaving him unsupervised with an operation this sensitive feels like handing him exactly the kind of opportunity he's been waiting for. She's right to be suspicious. What should have been a straightforward show of force turns into something else the moment they arrive. Sungmin giving orders that don't match the plan Yona approved, positioning their own men in a way that would leave the operation exposed rather than protected. Dorothy catches it in time, overriding him in front of the men present, using Yona's name and her own memory of exactly how his father used to structure a response to threats like this. The operation holds. The rival family backs off. And for the first time, some of the men in that room look at Dorothy the way they've only ever looked at Yona. When his mother hears about it, not from Dorothy, but from Choi, who reports it plainly, without embellishment, something in her expression shifts for the first time since Dorothy walked back through that gate. "You could have let him fail," his mother says to her later, testing. "He's your son," Dorothy says. "Whatever happens between me and Yona, I wasn't going to let this family fall apart because of someone using his weakness as an opportunity." His mother doesn't say thank you. She's not built for that. But she pours Dorothy tea that night, unprompted in the good cups, and in this family, Dorothy has learned that's as close to an apology as anyone gets. Yona doesn't want to believe it about his brother, and Dorothy understands why. She spent 3 months trying not to believe things about Yona either, and some part of a person always resists the family member over the stranger. "He's protected me since our father died," Yona says. "He's protected the version of you that needs protecting," Dorothy says. "That's not the same thing as loyalty." They don't resolve it that night. What they do instead is quieter, and somehow harder. Yona, still weak, still healing from the wound he took protecting her, sits across from Dorothy in the room she's technically locked into, and tells her the truth about why he let her walk away 3 months ago without fighting for her. "I thought if I let you go," he says, "at least you'd be far enough from this world that none of it could reach you. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things." "I loved you enough to lose myself once," Dorothy says. "I won't do that again." Then don't lose yourself, he says. Let me spend whatever time I have left learning how to deserve you instead. She doesn't answer him with words. She doesn't need to. For the first time in this entire story, the silence between them isn't the kind that hides something. It's the kind two people share when they've both finally stopped performing for each other. If this story has you holding your breath already, wait until the next part. What happens at the family summit is the moment everything either breaks completely or finally comes together, and it isn't who anyone in this story expects. The summit is the one event Dorothy was explicitly told not to attend. Every major criminal family with ties to the Kang organization gathers twice a year in a room designed to remind everyone in it exactly how much power is sitting at that table. Yona was supposed to appear, weakened, sympathetic, and formally announce his temporary withdrawal from operations. Sungmin was supposed to stand beside him, the loyal brother stepping in. Dorothy walks in alone instead. The room doesn't know what to do with that. 6 families worth of powerful men go quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something unplanned walks through the door. "Where is your husband?" one of them finally asks. "Recovering," Dorothy says. "No thanks to the person who poisoned him." She lays it out in front of them. The compound designed to mimic illness without killing. The security leak that only one person had access to. The documents already circulating to frame her for a death that was never actually going to happen on its own. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Every fact lands like its own small detonation. Sungmin, seated near the head of the table, laughs first, like she's told an inconvenient joke. "She's grieving," he tells the room. "She doesn't know what she's saying." "I have the lab report," Dorothy says. "The security logs, and a witness who watched you access files 2 weeks before the attack on my apartment. I know exactly what I'm saying." That's when he stops smiling. What happens next happens fast. Sungmin reaching for something under the table. One of his own men rising too quickly at the far end of the room, and Dorothy realizing, half a second too late, that exposing him in a room full of armed men was never going to end with him simply losing an argument. The gun comes up level with her chest. Yona is not supposed to be in the building. He walks in anyway, moving like a man who has spent 6 years being told to slow down and has decided, for the last time, not to. He doesn't reach her in time to stop the shot. He reaches her in time to take it instead. The sound of it fills the whole room. For a moment, nobody moves. Not the commanders, not Sungmin, not Dorothy, who has gone somewhere past screaming, into a silence that's louder than any sound she could make. Then Yona, blood already soaking through his shirt for the second time in 2 weeks, is still standing. For one full second, nobody in that room breathes. Not the commanders. Not Sungmin, gun still raised, staring at the man who wasn't supposed to be standing there. Not Dorothy, who has just watched her husband walk directly into a bullet meant for her and hasn't yet found the part of herself that knows how to react to that. She doesn't remember deciding to move. She's just suddenly at his side, hands pressed hard against the wound, telling him to stay with her in a voice that doesn't sound like hers. "I told you," he says, quiet enough that only she can hear it. "I asked for one last night because I was terrified I wouldn't get another chance to tell you the truth." "You're not using up your last chance tonight," she says. "You don't get to." Security moves on Sungmin before he can reach the door. He doesn't get far. The same commanders who spent weeks doubting Dorothy are the ones who pin him against the wall, Choi among the first to reach him, because whatever loyalty they had left for their chairman's brother didn't survive watching him draw a gun on an unarmed woman in front of the entire table. "You had everything," Yona says to him, voice barely holding, one hand still pressed to the wound, the other gripping the table edge to stay upright. "You didn't need to take it from me. I would have given you a piece of it if you'd asked." "I didn't want a piece," Sungmin says, and for the first time since Dorothy has known him, his voice loses the practiced warmth entirely. "I wanted to stop being the son who was always standing next to you instead of in front of you." It's the closest thing to an honest answer the room gets, and it doesn't excuse anything. Not the poisoning, not the men sent to Dorothy's apartment, not the frame built to end with her in a courtroom explaining a death that was never supposed to happen on its own. But for a moment, Dorothy sees something underneath the calculation that's driven every move he's made for weeks. A man who spent his whole life being the backup plan, and decided one day that he'd rather be the villain than stay invisible. It doesn't make her forgive him. It just makes the whole thing sadder than she expected it to be, in the second before security drags him out of the room. Months pass before Yona is fully well again. The correct treatment finally administered once the compound was identified. The fake terminal diagnosis quietly corrected. The real recovery slower than either of them expected, but steady. Sungmin's betrayal unravels the rest of the way once investigators start pulling the thread. The falsified evidence, the bribed witnesses, the story he'd built where Dorothy would take the blame for a death he engineered, but never actually intended to let happen on its own terms. He'd wanted the Empire handed to him gently, sympathetically, with Dorothy positioned as the villain of a tragedy that was never real. He doesn't get the Empire. He gets a cell and a family that finally stops making excuses for him. His mother visits him once, early on, and comes back from that visit different, quieter, older somehow, though she never tells anyone exactly what was said. She starts spending more time with Dorothy after that, not out of obligation, but the way people do when they've run out of everyone else who understands what the last few months actually cost them. Dorothy doesn't push for more than that. She's learned that some doors open slowly, on their own schedule, and forcing them only cracks the hinge. Choi and the other commanders stop treating her presence in meetings like a question that needs answering. Nobody makes a formal announcement about it. It simply becomes true, the way most real changes in that house do, not with a ceremony, but with the absence of an argument that used to happen every time and now just doesn't. Dorothy reopens the fashion studio, too, the one she built during the 3 months she thought she was done with all of this. She half expects it to feel like a relic from a life she's already outgrown. Instead, standing in it again, fabric samples back on the table where she left them. It feels like proof of something, that the woman who built this business without his name on the lease didn't disappear the moment she walked back through that iron gate. She just learned how to carry both versions of herself at once. If you've stayed with this story from the beginning, you already know it was never really about the Empire, or the poison, or even the Mafia. It was about a woman who almost let herself disappear inside someone else's world, and found her way back to the version of herself that world never got to touch. Stay for what she does with those divorce papers, because it isn't the ending you're expecting. The divorce papers are still sitting in a drawer in Dorothy's old office, unsigned, technically still active. The last piece of the old plan she made when she thought leaving was the only way to survive loving this man. Yona doesn't ask her to destroy them. He tells her that, whatever she decides, he'll respect it. The first time in 6 years he's ever handed her a decision without trying to shape the outcome first. Dorothy looks at the papers for a long time. She thinks about the woman who signed them 3 months ago, exhausted, grieving a marriage she thought had quietly died somewhere between the secrets and the silence. That woman wasn't wrong to leave. Leaving is what taught Dorothy that she could survive without his name, without his money, without anyone's permission to build something that belonged only to her. If she hadn't walked away first, she never would have found out she was capable of walking back in on her own terms instead of his. That's the part nobody warns you about when a relationship almost breaks you. Sometimes the leaving isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the only way you ever find out what you're actually worth to the person who's left and to yourself. She isn't staying because she's afraid of what happens if she leaves. She isn't staying because of the money, or the name, or the empire that almost cost her everything twice. She tears the papers in half because, after all of it, the poison, the betrayal, the gun in a room full of powerful men, she still loves him. And for the first time, she trusts that the love isn't the dangerous part. The silence used to be the dangerous part, and there's no silence left between them now. Yona takes her hand like it's the only thing he's ever actually wanted, more than the empire, more than the power, more than his own name on the building downtown. For the first time since she's known him, the most feared man in Seoul isn't thinking about any of that. He's just thinking about his wife. And this time, Dorothy chooses to stay, not because the story asked her to, but because she finally wrote the ending herself. If you were Dorothy, tearing up those papers or walking away for good, tell me in the comments which one you'd have chosen, because I already know this one's going to split the room. If Dorothy earned her ending, hit like before you go. And subscribe, because this isn't the last story like this one you're going to want to see.